Welcome back to Normal Island. I hope you had a great weekend. I'm Curtis Daly, and tonight we've got first timer on Normal Island, Nafal Khan. How have you been today?
I'm alright, thank you, guys. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I mean, I've been better, but we're gonna power through. But coming up on tonight's show, we have Tory MP Chris Phillips says Britain is work shy. Is Morgan McSweeney ready to ditch Keir Starmer? And tariff wars between the US, Mexico, and Canada ramps up. Now, before we start, please make sure you like the stream. Please keep the comments going, and we'll get to them about halfway through. Now, we're also pushing toward 20,000 subscribers. It'll be a real nice milestone if we get there. I mean, we're close to 18. So if none of you are subscribed, make sure you hit that button and tell everyone about us. Now, on to our first story. The Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philip has accused people in Britain of being work shy. This is a clip from Nick Robinson's Political Thinking, where Philip said that Britain needed to up its game.
I picked up that habit at quite an early age, and I'm trying to give that to my own kids, and I think it's something I'd like to try and infuse more into our national ways to work hard. So I, for example, used to deliver the local newspaper. I used to wash people's cars. I used to do the garden for neighbours. My first proper job was in Sainsbury's in South London. And I just found that working hard brought its own reward. And I've just kept doing that ever since, whether in business and now in politics. And I'm glad that I kind of picked up that habit at quite an early age. And I'm trying to give that to my own kids. And I think it's something I'd like to try and infuse more into our national culture as well.
That's intriguing. Do you think that sort of belief in hard work is something that's missing in Britain today?
I do a bit. There are 9 million working age adults who are not working. And as we compete globally with countries like, South Korea, China, India, we need a work ethic. We need everybody to be making a contribution. We are in, as George Osborne said years ago, we are in a global race. And that means we've got to be competitive. And it means we've got to work hard. And I think as a country, we need to lift our game. We need to up our game.
I'm smiling because as you say this, I'm reminded of a couple of your colleagues who my producer and I called to ask about you. And they say he's the most competitive man we know. Is this true that apparently when you play football, which you do, not only have you once got a black eye for your team, but when the ball goes over the fence, everybody else walks round and you insist on climbing, 10, 12, 14 feet?
Quite high.
Now, first off, I thought it was notable that Robinson didn't give some kind of soft pushback even and continued to fawn over him. I mean, that was pretty much vomit-inducing. Now, people work hard in this country. In fact, people have had enough. And the Tories want a low regulation, low wages, and essentially zero workers' power, whilst people work till they drop. Now, Philip has actually worked under Liz Truss, and she made similar arguments in the past. The former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, once co-wrote a book, Britannia Unchained, with 5 other Tory MPs that described British people as among the worst idlers in the world, and claimed too many people in Britain prefer a lion to hard work. Now, Labour have also responded to the comments made by Philip. A Labour spokesperson said after the Conservatives' economic failure left working people worse off, it takes some real brass neck for the Tory top team to tell the public that it's not really their fault. It's the same old Tories. They haven't changed and they've learned nothing. Now, productivity is down, but that's not laziness. But I would say because of our broken public services, long work hours, and I'd argue that we're not exactly a healthy society. I mean, our NHS is completely shot. Noffel, I want to get your reaction to Philip claiming that we're a work-shy country.
I mean, it's quite frankly ridiculous because when you compare the hours that we work compared to our European counterparts, it's far higher, in fact. And reportedly, we have much tighter deadlines for, projects. And we also have far worse public services. Like you said, our NHS is having a massive waiting line. What I really find interesting in this stereotype of the British worker being completely lazy is that Phillips doesn't actually talk about his hard graft. because the reality is that he's had multiple failed business ventures that have meant millions have been gone to debt. And we all know that when millions are lost in a business, someone's got to socialize those losses. So when you look at things like HGV training under Philip, where he owned more than £500,000 to HMRC and £1.4 million to unpaid services, it really makes you wonder whether his patriotism is shining through. The same with his offshore accounts that he's got with Pluto Finance, which are all property management firms, which, as far as I'm aware, is not grafting hard at all, but actually making the living standards for people harder and houses more expensive. So, in trying to be the poster boy for meritocratic capitalism, he fails quite hard.
Yeah, absolutely true. I suppose, I mean, on that same show, with Nick Robinson, he talked about his business ventures and he talked about his failed ventures too. But he would still argue, yeah, I failed, I made mistakes, but I still got out there. I still did the work. And there's this idea, not just in Britain, but just the idea pervasive in neoliberal capitalism, is that essentially everyone can be a small business owner. Everyone can be a CEO. But that's not true, is it? Under this system, it's impossible to have 7 billion CEOs in the world. There has to be those that do the cleaning, the menial jobs, the opening the tills, the sales. They have to do that. So the system elevates some people and pushes other people down. I'm not surprised that a Tory MP doesn't understand that, or maybe he does, but just refuses to say it. But there's this idea that, everyone can graft and everyone can be sort of their own boss, but that system doesn't allow that to happen, does it?
No, especially post 2008, where quantitative easing, all these easy money policies essentially drove everything into assets such as housing. There's a lack of investment for small businesses even to thrive, and we've even seen Reeve's fiscal rules. Instead of taxing the rich, gone to the national insurance contribution, which is obviously going to make it harder to employ people. You've really got to wonder, not just the Tories, but also Labour, how is neoliberalism really going? It's in complete crises. And I really fail to see a real political avenue from both the Tories and Labour to make a standout to appeal to the left. And really what it's going to do is the same that it's done in America, which is lay the groundworks for an unsatisfied voter base of the millions. And it's going to hand reform possibly a win in 2029, or if they choose to do it early in 2028.
I'm glad you brought up Labour, because I wanted to ask you about their response. I mean, of course, they're going to attack Phillips on this, but I think you're going to agree with me here. What economic policies that they offer differ from the Tories? I mean, they've been hostile to unions, so it's easy to condemn Phillips's words, but they don't have any policies to improve the lives of workers. So what are your thoughts on that?
Why has Starmer taken in the most gifts since any Labour leader since '97? Why has Starmer decided to rule out completely taxing the wealthy? Why are these fiscal rules missing any leeway of actually making a long-term plan for our public services? It's like many have quoted in multiple columns, our public services are in a death loop. There is no long-term plan for any sort of stable recovery. And so when you hear Labour say of all people where their popularity is basically down the gutter because of the winter fuel allowance being scrapped, even means tested now, but you can have an argument about the threshold for that. It really, like I said before, makes you think that they are not doing anything to help the working people. In fact, just lay the ground running for a populist right.
I agree. I mean, there's this idea that pushing people, keep pushing people, that drives productivity. How do we get more out of people? But as I mentioned earlier, productivity is down. I mean, I think we should be going the other way, focusing on less work and more rest. A 4-day week could be a solution. And where businesses have adopted the 4-day week, productivity isn't effective. And actually, we've seen it increase in some cases. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on a 4-day week as a way of potentially boosting productivity? And of course, the obvious one, human happiness.
Yeah, well, it's almost like to have a stable working economy, you need stable working people. It's not always just about the profit and finance. At the end of the day, many people have wrote about this, is the fact that capitalism will have its contradictions, and one of its contradictions is the short-term profit. But when you exhaust the labor base, your profits are going to fall. And like you mentioned, the 4-day working week is something that's very interesting. And maybe you can expand this, but I can't help wonder if this is purely a coincidence that Philip has talked about this when just last week there were talks of 200 UK companies adopting a 4-day working week, and in the US, Trump was essentially talking about cracking down on working from home.
Yeah, there's I think I was watching. I wasn't personally watching The Apprentice. My partner watches it, and but by the way, she's just as she's on the left like me, shall I say? But it's a guilty pleasure. And for me, it was basic. Like, The Apprentice is just neoliberalism at its core. But I caught something that Alan Sugar said, which is that I think one of the contestants was saying that they work a little bit less than other people, and his response was, "Oh, you're not going to tell me you're going to work from home now?" And there's this idea from bosses, and of course Trump his mentality is the billionaire class. He's very much the boss mentality. Is working from home is something they don't like, but there's an incentive to get people to the office because of commercial landlordism. I mean, someone profits when people go into the office, even though there are so many productivity flaws there. I mean, how much more work do you actually get done? And that, to me, I want to ask a wider question, which is essentially for people like Trump and those who represent the business class. It's more about clamping down on the working class over anything else. And the reason why I say that is because Trump's tax policy. Now, the tax policy, yes, they're cutting taxes for the wealthy, but they're only cutting taxes for the wealthy just by a little bit, but they're raising taxes on the workers by a lot. So it seems about crushing the workers' spirit above anything else.
It's really interesting you mentioned that, actually, because as far as Trump's policy goes, he's I would call it an accelerationist. Whatever the US would look in about 10 to 20 years' time, Trump's deciding to do it now. And that could go for the Democrats. I mean, you look at Kamala Harris, she was essentially talking about how she'd be the toughest on immigration, even more than the Republicans. And you really have to question, well, how much longer will people even put up with the populist right for? There will come a certain time where Trump's his term will end, and we will question, especially those in America, how well did it go? He doesn't have the benefit of having somewhat of a decent economy that he inherited from Obama. I mean, he's inherited an inflationary economy now, and as we know, whatever trends in America will directly affect his. So if Trump decides to go along with his plans, and we will see austerity and a cost of living crisis in America rise even more on the backbone of a healthcare CEO just being assassinated, mind you, which I wouldn't think is exactly a good thing to do. You have to ask, what will Reform decide to parrot here? And Farage is probably already writing down all the key plays from Trump's playbook.
I mean, to bring it back to Chris Phillip, I mean, when he talked about Britain stepping up their game, he talked about competitive spirit. First of all, we all work longer hours than our European counterparts. People are tired, and some rich guy with failed businesses telling you we need to work harder to compete with other workers. It's a race to the bottom, isn't it? Because he also compared us to places with low workers' rights and regulation, like China, for example. I don't want to be like China. I mean, China, the state of China have invested in some superb things, but living there as a worker is not too good. But these people who run our politics. I mean, of course, he's not in government, but his ideology is very much in government. It has been at least for the last 45 years. Is to make us more tired, to destroy our spirit, have essentially a gig economy for everyone, and a lack of workers' rights. Yes, we'll be competing against China, but that's for the capital class to lavish, not us.
It says it all because he quoted George Osborne, which laid the groundwork for austerity as well. So when we're talking about a global race, and you're quoting someone who essentially broke the public services that would mean we'd have even a step in that global race, you've really got to wonder why we're taking any sort of advice, or the columns have quoted the brass neck Philip has as a parasite to really, really talk about how people aren't working hard enough. And I'd even just like to mention, when he's talking about the hard work that he's essentially put in and he wants to instill to his children, Philip despite having multiple failed business ventures, he never actually started up a company that was successful. One that I haven't mentioned yet is the fact that he, for a long time, parroted being a director of a company, but records show he was just a mere salesman. And said company was making £2 million in losses. So, if we're going to take advice from Philip, it's not just to fail at capitalism, socialize the losses, but it's also to lie for some reason to make yourself far more appealing, which is literally not going to sit well with anyone.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to our second story, but some really good analysis there from you. Now, let's move on. Patrick Maguire's latest book, Get In, the inside story of Labour under Starmer, details certain accounts of Starmer's ineffectiveness as Labour leader. One specific comment was from Morgan McSweeney, one of the architects of right-wing faction Labour Together and the man behind Keir Starmer's rise. McSweeney was openly fatalistic, questioning his boss's lack of politics. Keir acts like a HR manager, not a leader. What's the point of circling the wagons if you can't last? Also revealed in the book and in the Times was the plot to replace Starmer as leader. Revealed the moment Wes Streeting confronted Rachel Reeves about which of them would run if Keir Starmer quits. In the Commons vote and lobby in 2022, Reeves refused to be drawn, though plot was already afoot to install Shadow Chancellor. Now, the timing of this seems quite deliberate. The book releasing with people from Starmer's inner circle complaining about him and discussions of who would replace him. Novel, is Morgan McSweeney ready to dump Starmer and replace him already?
I honestly think that Morgan McSweeney was always ready to dump Starmer from the beginning. I mean, you have far more competent types, which the Labour factions would like probably Wes Streeting, for example, to take that position. I think really the most interesting thing about all of this is it completely mirrors what the public has been feeling and saying about Starmer. And, whether you're on the left or even the right, everyone knows that when Starmer gets up on stage, it's quite frankly non-appealing, centrist. You don't want to listen to him. And so from the very beginning, it seems like Starmer really had no political narrative. It was to oust Corbyn from the party and think, well, maybe I could run my own little political campaign. But he's really delivered nothing. And it's not just apparent to us, but it's apparent to the people around him. And so, going forward, I honestly don't know what exactly Labour has in store. Like I said, I believe Wes Streeting might look like someone they'd like to have there. But what's really interesting is whoever does replace Starmer, if said happens, those columns I've mentioned that the insiders at Labour are wanting someone that's a bit more right than Starmer, weirdly enough, talking about how Vet Cooper should have been replaced because she was failing to tackle the anti-terror things. She was failing to tackle the Islamist terror as someone that overlooks that sort of thing. So I'm really not quite sure what he has in stock, but I just I do find it interesting that what we see on the outside is something that's completely mirrored on the inside.
I mean, I'm completely with you that I do think Wes Streeting is more competent. I use air quotes, by the way. Competent than Keir Starmer. He's not a better politician, but I think he's more competent. And I think if I was Morgan McSweeney, I wouldn't want someone who's too competent because clearly he controls... I call him the shadow prime minister. He installed Keir Starmer. He was his project from the beginning. And maybe Wes Streeting is too ideologically right-wing. For me, I don't think that's... and I think a lot of what people are saying in the inner circles of Keir Starmer in this book, they are right. They're saying he's kind of apolitical. He's like a HR manager because he's a vacuum inside. The problem with Wes Streeting is he's more ideologically right-wing. And yes, that might line up with Morgan McSweeney and the Labour Together people because they are very much on the Labour right. But it might make him a bit harder to control. There's also the fact... My next question was going to be... hypothetical situation, what do you think of Rachel Reeves or Wes Streeting becoming Labour leader? But I guess the question I want to follow up from this one is Wes Streeting won his seat by the skin of his teeth, 500 votes, and I wrote a tweet out yesterday saying I actually hope Wes Streeting becomes leader and that the next election Liam Mohammed replaces him. So a couple of questions there for you. What do you make of all of that?
Well, as far as West Streeting's appeals goes to, as someone as Labour leader, I think possibly yes, he is a bit right wing, but even on some issues, West Streeting, I don't know how there would be a reconciliation of how popular he is. Like you said, he won just by the skin of his teeth, but even the fact that his social care plan is to be released 1 year before the general election. I mean, you look at after World War II, Nye Bevan did it in about 3 years. And so why does Streeting have to have someone do it for him and be 1 year before the general election? But, that sort of plotting, that sort of, I guess the word would be not sneaky, but politics essentially might be something that Morgan McSweeney actually is quite on board, because unlike Starmer, who comes up with a bunch of plans from thin air, it seems like Westrian can kind of play the game a little bit. So there might be some level of not like you said, competency there. Reeves, I think especially as well, she's very very sensible, but um, I think she bores people far too much. Whereas Streeting is someone that can play the game of politics. But it is certainly. I'm sort of 50-50 on that question. I'm not 100% sure. But I think Streeting probably looks the most able to play the Labour game at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it pains me to say it, but yes, I think out of all three, Wes Streeting has the most charisma. And I don't think he's particularly charismatic, but you're right, he knows how to play the game a little bit better. I think maybe Morgan McSweeney was surprised at how wooden Keir Starmer is. When I was researching this story, there was something else that came out, which is in the Times and the book, is that he hired an actress. I can't remember her name now. I should remember her name. But he hired her to sort of improve his speeches. And they're like, "Yeah, well done. You've improved so much." And I'm like, "Where's the improvement? You're still terrible." Rachel Reeves is incredibly uncharismatic. She's like a robot, really, really bad. The two of them.
It's it's like you said, there is really no charisma there. Even Rachel Reeves, who was just speaking recently on Sky and essentially talking and questioned about her fiscal rules, the prompt was brought up that how can you justify certain cuts that you've made, and how will this affect the working population? They just bring out statistics and numbers, and it's quite literally it's robotic. It doesn't make any sense. It's not something that will appeal to the average person. But another thing about Streeting is he's got quite good networking and links to the private healthcare industry, right? That's something that the Labour NEC might find very attractive, because they themselves are people in the hedge fund business. So, there is another incentive there to look that way forward, especially because Streeting has a complete amount of zero empathy for example, transgender teenagers as well. So I do think that there is something potentially there. I think Reeves would bore people to death, but I think that like you said, I think Streeting can play that game.
It's interesting there. I mean, in terms of his comments on trans people, I don't think that's a battle those on the inside of the Labour Party particularly care about or want to fight. But I think if Wes Streeting had a safe seat, I could see there being moves to replace Keir Starmer already. I mean, do you think that Starmer will be replaced before the next election? Or do you think they're going to try and stick at him? Because, the attack the Labour Party had against the Tories was they keep changing prime ministers, they keep changing people, they can't, they're not a stable government. Replacing, a Labour prime minister who won a huge majority. Of course, obviously, first past the post means it was a loveless landslide, to quote Jeremy Corbyn. But it was still a huge landslide in terms of seats, so that should solidify your place as prime minister. So to replace him before the first term, it shows that they're chaotic. So is there an incentive to keep Starmer on, do you think, or is he that much of a dud? He's that unpopular. Better to get rid straight away.
It really just depends on how Starmer's politics will continue, and they are quite bleak, and they will continue to be bleak, and there will be that crisis within Labour insiders that will be looking to replace him, and I genuinely think he will be, because, like we said, Labour together and Starmer's basically soft coup to oust Jeremy Corbyn, with the Labour right, was something that I don't actually think planned this far ahead, and they were quite surprised, in fact, by, like you said, Starmer's complete dryness to do politics. There is no vision here that Starmer will do anything different. In fact, he just quite literally likes ignoring domestic things and going on meetings with very popular people all
Yeah.
around the globe.
Making 100-year pacts with Ukraine.
Yeah, which politically means nothing,
Means
or
nothing, yeah.
refusing to even just recently comment about anything on Trump and saying, well, I don't have to choose between the EU and the US. They're going to need someone that makes a firm decision, because before the public gets fed up with it, Labour insiders will.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very much convinced that Keir Starmer was replaced not to win an election. I don't think they get that far. I think the soft coup, as you call it, was about kicking out not just Corbyn but the left and reshaping the party into an even smaller clique. And I think winning the election was not on their radar, but they didn't expect for the Tories to collapse. But I think we're gonna. Well, actually, before we move on, I think we're gonna go to some of our comments, and actually, we're gonna do something new. And we might continue this. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. But basically, when we go to our comments now, our producer in the background is actually going to get in on the act. So he's going to respond to some of your comments too, which I think is really, really exciting. It's kind of like a majority report thing. But before we bring up the first comment, I do want to say that if you like what we're doing and you want to support us, then please like this stream and share it with as many people as possible. We're live on Twitter as well, so if you happen to be watching on Twitter, give us a retweet, give us a heart, and if you really can, you can help us grow to a fully fledged media organisation by supporting us financially by going to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. There you can give us a monthly donation via Patreon, or there's another link there where you can give us a one-off donation. We want to improve our equipment, as we always say, but also we want to get more ambitious content out there, do more interviews. All of that costs money. Paying for people's travel, of course, how much train tickets cost these days. So any contribution is incredibly helpful. I do want to thank our viewers over the last couple of weeks who've been incredibly generous with the memberships. Zeke the Beast, I know you were mentioned last show, but I want to say it again, who gave 50 Turn Left memberships on one of our shows. Really, really generous stuff. But just all of you guys watching, I love seeing the same names in the chat. It's really good to see that we're building a community here. Let's go to your comments. And also, welcome on Cog to the stream. Thank you. It was apparently we can't hear you, Cog. Oh, I think that's my fault. That is my fault, right? Everyone can hear Cog now. I'm so sorry. Do you mind starting that entire thing again?
Of course. Just do people in the chat want to just confirm they can hear me? And Curtis, if you wouldn't mind having a look, just to confirm, just so that we're not talking, doing that again.
Yeah, I didn't replace you in the scene. I had your little thing there, but I didn't put you in it.
Yes.
Yeah, you should be able to. Yeah, sorry.
Cool.
We try and be professional. We make the setup look all professional, but we're still a bunch of idiots, aren't we?
Yes, very much so. So Andy Carter has said this. Chris Phillips is right. I want an easy life, and I'm sure Andy was kind of semi-joking when he said that. However, I think it does raise that important question of, do we want to live to work or work to live? And should we allow essentially should we allow those at the top to tell us that there's value to any kind of work without a proper eye on workers' rights and remuneration? And I wondered what you guys thought of that as a sort of angle of approach, like a look at that.
I feel like this opens up to a more of a post-capitalist kind of conversation, which I'm always ready to have, because I introduce stories about productivity. It's a very social democratic framing of it as a socialist, but Andy, I think that you hit the heart of the question, which is we can talk about productivity, we can talk about our public services, but in the year 2025, it's a question that I've asked myself since I was 12, 13 years old, and I still have it today. Aren't we supposed to be making a society that's easier and better for people? But it looks like that people are working longer hours for lower wages. I think we all want an easy life, and we shouldn't be afraid to say that. We shouldn't be afraid to say that leisure is good. So even us leftists have been caught in a trap where we have to frame things in economical terms and productivity terms. And sometimes we lose sight that we've got these rich people who are failing at businesses telling us to work harder. No, we should be working less. And I'm sorry to say that. I'm not sorry, though.
Yeah, Noffel, did you want to jump in on that question?
I think it's not only just like Andy said, it's not just us wanting an easy life. I think everyone deserves an easy life. I think the labour that we put in, the work that we put in, the working class are the people that build up a nation. They always have. No matter what system it's been, whether that be feudalism, even terrible ones like slavery, for example, it's always been the people that have built the very system, the whole industry has been the working class. So if anything, we want it, but quite frankly, we deserve it, because if it wasn't for people going out there in the UK working every single day, our nurses, our teachers, anyone in the service economy especially, we wouldn't have what we have today, and the CEOs wouldn't have the lives that they have either.
I've got a question for, I suppose, everyone, including those in the chat. I mean, us as the left, do we continue to make the argument saying, well, we need to have more work-life balance, we need to have a 4-day week because it's good for productivity, it means people get a rest and they're rejuvenated thinking about to work and essentially work harder? Do we keep doing that, or do we just turn around and say, let's stop sounding like social democrats and say what you've just said? We are the workers who create the wealth in society. A basic society would not function without us. So if we want to have more leisure time, we downright deserve it, and kind of, I guess, be a bit more vague. Don't use technical arguments, but sort of appeal to emotion. Or would people just look at us as, when I have these conversations with some people, they just say, oh, you're such a naive utopian socialist. I mean, but I guess, we're in the era of populism, and I've long called for left parties like the Green Party to sound more populist. Do you think the entire left should start sounding more like that?
Cog, do you want to, before I say anything?
Yeah, I think it is a bit of a difficult question. I think you'll always have an easier time if you're appealing to an emotional idea. Like, I think that's always going to be always going to have an easier time with that. It's just it's just so I guess it's easier to circumvent than the argument that because I can see how, particularly if you're a disabled person, that argument could also be weaponized against you, right? The sort of general argument, if you're too general about it, like, we produce all the stuff. If you assign productivity to people's value and people's inherent value, which I think is part of what Chris Phelps is trying to do here. And I do kind of want to tie it to the idea. Helena is always using this expression about talking about growth and productivity, and saying, well, in order to get growth and productivity, you need that investment for fiscal expansion. And Helena, No Justice MTG, by the way, for those who don't know, go and subscribe. Definitely go and subscribe to Helena. And one of the analogies she's always saying is that expecting growth and productivity without investment for that physical expansion is like saying that you'll water the plant if it's a good plant and starts growing before you've watered it. Do you know what I mean? It's like you really are putting the cart before the horse. And it's a macro question. it's a question of macroeconomics rather than people's microeconomics, because we've got to, of course, protect the disabled. And this is an argument that Karl Marx made in Critique of the Gotha program. The need for like social support for people who can't work for whatever reason. So I think it's only right that we sort of like use that as a basis going forward, not because Marx said it, but because it's a good argument.
Although
yeah.
I agree with a lot of Marx, what he says.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, I'm surprised. Yes. Okay, cool. Let's have a look. So Jacqueline brought up this and said, I bet Chris Phillips will have no objection to people becoming unemployed because of robots or AI. And I wanted your guys' commentary on how you think AI fits into all of this as more jobs start to become automated, and if this changes the question about our relationship to work. What do you guys think?
Do you want to start, Nuffle?
Well, since we brought up Marx, I'll bring up Marx again. Automation under capitalism, like Marx talked about. Obviously, we've gone from people under a system of feudalism that were able to be skilled workers that completely made one thing. You have a craftsman, you have a carpenter, had a wide variety of skills. But since we've been forced into industrial cities and we only have our labor to sell, now we work in things like 30% of the economy works in things like services. And that's one of our biggest outputs, like financial services to different nations. And it's really particularly worrying that when your skills that you learn all the way from, primary, secondary school, sixth form and college and straight into the workplace is nothing but skills that are readily available for the top CEOs, AI starts to really question those skills that we have. Admin work, for example, retail work, for example, simple receptionist jobs. They can be taken over by AI. And I'm not one of those AI doomers. I don't think maybe it'll happen anytime soon. But we do need to question in the near future what that'll look like. And if countries like the UK, who have announced an AI plan, decide to build all these data centers, there needs to be a real question of how that AI is going to be used.
When you were speaking about the contradictions of capitalism earlier, about when you squeeze sort of profits off workers, the general point was that workers can't afford to buy the stuff they sell. And I was thinking about AI as you were saying that, so I'm kind of glad this question came up, because that's another contradiction of capitalism, which is that the biggest proponents of capitalism love AI. And I agree, I'm not an AI doomer like you. I think that AI really has some uses as a tool to assist, not to replace. But that's another contradiction because workers are being replaced by AI. But once again, what you can do with the population and how people are going to buy your products, which kind of leaves us into... I think AI is actually, for me anyway, capitalism is so self-contradicting that it seeds its own downfall, and AI is part of that. And essentially, we're going to move into, and arguably, Yanis Varoufakis says that we already have, which is techno-feudalism, because now we get to the point where workers have such little power, and that's including economic power, that instead of essentially keeping society run by people buying stuff, we're going to have to kind of physically control people. And that's why we kind of have techno-feudalism. And essentially, you're absolutely right when you talk about us becoming a service economy. There's a reason why conservatives and right-wingers love talking about service economies, because we're not building anything, and essentially everyone is being pushed into that small bracket because AI is going to replace a lot of the automatic jobs, or becoming automatic jobs. So it's such an inherent contradiction. But what worries me is, democracy isn't going to suddenly manifest itself out of the sort of the crisis of capitalism. It is going to be a more feudal society. I haven't read the book by Yanis Varoufakis, but he's got a book out called Techno-Feudalism. I really want to read it. I don't know if Cog, if I had anything to add.
Yeah. One of the ways that we can reach older generations is through, and obviously this is like accepting the people who are more comfortable with it, but often an inroad for reaching older generations, more conservative people who might be against the idea of like shifting ownership burden on from the owner onto the worker. One of the appeals that we can make here is technophobia. It's the idea that actually automation can be quite frightening, and one of the ways that you can combat that is by giving workers greater control of the automation process. So let's say that you work in a store, and let's say you work in, I don't know, Sainsbury's or Tesco, and they say, oh, we're introducing these new self-service machines. Let's say it's like 10 years ago, you're just starting to introduce self-service machines. Well, if you've got like 5 people on the shop floor, okay, there's only, you only require 2 people to be on the top floor now officially if you run it from the top down. However, if everybody has like an equal say, if you've got a democratic process in place for running that company, workers aren't going to fire themselves in order to replace themselves with AI. So there's a really like powerful argument here for replacing replacing this dictatorship of the bourgeoisie with a democracy of the proletariat, of a democracy of workers who look out for each other and who can lead better lives. And then you've got 5 people who are able to be 10 times more productive because they're working alongside machines, maintaining those machines while doing other things. There's just such great arguments for it.
Yeah, I mean, and not to spend too much time on this question, but I feel like this question really did open up. It's quite an intellectual question.
Yeah.
That it's the answers are so simple. So if you're worried about automation taking over your jobs, you democratize the workplace because you're right, no one's going to vote for their own jobs to be lost. And that's exactly the same with capital flight. You essentially wipe out capital flight or the risk of capital flight with social or socialist businesses because no one's going to vote for their jobs to be shipped overseas. No one's going to do that. So it's really, really simple just to say we had universal suffrage and our democracy is incredibly flawed, but the reason why it's incredibly flawed is that we stopped expanding democracy. We should have kept on expanding democracy into our workplace. But that it was socialism or barbarism. I guess we've gone down the road of barbarism. Should we move on to another one?
Yeah, let's have a look. So I just want to read out this comment from Becca because I do think it speaks to a common sentiment. I'm sick of people who have so much money that they never have to work again, telling people who work to pay bills that we aren't doing enough or we aren't dedicated enough. I think that's just a concept. I'll ask you guys to comment on that. I just think that's a common sentiment. We also had this from Daniel. Which he corrected a couple of comments later. It's supposed to say we will always regret not electing RLB, and I do agree because I do think there's and there's several comments that kind of fit under this vein. So I'll pair them up. Becca also said if I had to choose one of the shower of shites, Angela Rayner. And that's just it, right? Is that there's a real glut of talent at the top of the Labour Party now as a result of like going for this business managerial class. And I wondered how you guys felt about that in relation to the charismatic leaders that we are seeing coming from the right wing and, their sort of like idea of holding rallies at every given opportunity to try and like encourage their supporter base. And whether or not there's something we can do as the left to help combat that, because it's clear that the Liberals don't have those charismatic leaders. What do you guys think about that?
I think you make a really good point. Nigel Farage has this talent of whatever topic there is in UK politics, he manages to find a way to center himself around it. And it really doesn't matter. There's no shame in that. If people don't really have the shame of being bigoted, going out on riots on the streets, and they don't actually feel at all ashamed to hijack women and girls' safety to make it a racist narrative, why should we on the left be worried about anything we say? And I think it calls back to what you said, which is Liberals don't have the ability to do so. And historically, they never have, because the Liberals have always been the ones to side with the populist right and always appease their narratives, whereas the left have always been the ones to organise, and they've never been ashamed of doing it ever. And I think one of the biggest pitfalls that we've been talking about today around trying to navigate is how to divorce a proper narrative which hasn't been hijacked by liberals, so that the people think that liberalism is the left, or these woke liberals essentially. And I think we have to look back at our roots and how leftists have always decided to organize, whether that be picket lines, whether that be, mass protest, whether that be educational programs. You have great examples from Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers, truly great. And I think it's really just about condensing down the arguments for the left into a very, very simple sentiment, that is, we work hard. Everyone knows we work hard. We're extremely stressed, and what we want to do is we want to be able to manage that ourselves now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right, Cog. There's a true lack of talent. First of all, there's obviously a lack of talent among sort of the liberals, the centrists, because they never really had any talent. The few who I can think who did have talent was someone like Obama. But of course, the problem with liberals, and when you do find politicians who are incredibly charismatic, like Obama, is that the policies don't follow suit with the rhetoric. So Obama, incredibly popular, very popular, and he's a very slick guy. But you get to 2012 and you're thinking, okay, well, he campaigned as, I would say he campaigned more as a radical in 2012 than 08, but he didn't deliver on anything. So then that's where essentially where the rise of populism is enacted by the liberals. Now, the reason why the left, I think, specifically the Labour left, don't have any leaders is due to the fact that the Liberals have shut them out. You'll note that the leadership rules have been changed in order to get on the ballot to become leader. I think it was the threshold is being made more difficult. And through that, not only did they shut left-wing voices out, but through those rules, if you're a minority, if you're a woman or if you're a black woman, for example, you're less likely to get on the ballot. So when liberals do that to try and shut out the left, they end up shutting out a whole group of or different groups of people. So of course you're going to have no talent because you just want to keep the Labour Party as a clique. And liberals have always been authoritarian because they're worried about the left insurgents. So I think the left don't have many leaders because the instruments the left have historically used, which is vehicles like the Labour Party, often working with liberals, they're shut out. I also think there's a lack of confidence, which to kind of echo what Nuffle was saying, a bit of lack of confidence here. And I'm seeing it in the Green Party. Now, I think I see someone like Zach Palansky, really, really impressed by him, really impressed by his rhetoric, but the way he comes across. But I'm not seeing that translated across the Green Party. And I think the left isn't confident, understandably so, because we're racking up losses at the moment. It's hardly a good time for the left. But we need to be bolder and more confident. I don't know if you all agree with that or not, though.
100%. I don't really have much else to say, so I completely agree. Yeah.
No, I think we should be more shy. I think we should stop talking and be more shy.
I also think, sorry to cut you off, though, I think RLB, although I liked her, I don't think she would have made... I don't know. I'm not sure if she won or not, but I don't think she would have made it to being Prime Minister. The reason why I wanted the RLB to win was to finish off the democratisation of the Labour Party. Because the biggest failing of Jeremy Corbyn or Team Corbyn was not pushing for open selection. And actually, a while back I caught up with Len McCluskey and I asked him bluntly, I said, you had a chance to push through open selection and you didn't. Why? It's clearly a failing. You said, you said hindsight was a good thing, but I feel like a lot of us lefties at the time were saying, no, we need to push this through. They just simply said they didn't realise the right were going to be so callous. Again, that's a huge oversight. So the point for me was to elect RLB as leader, just so we can essentially make the transformation within the Labour Party. And if she had to step down, she had to step down. I guess I was looking at RLB the way Morgan McSweeney was looking at Keir Starmer. It wasn't necessary to win an election, but to essentially finish off the purging on the left. For me, it would have been to open the party, open the Labour Party to democracy. And in terms of Angela Rayner, yes, obviously she's the least worst out of all of them. She's not ideologically like Wes Streeting, but she has been kind of what's the word, cucked, people use online. She's gonna be cucked. I feel like such a boomer old man in a position.
Yeah, ignoring that comment. I do feel like it more than anything, I just want somebody who believes what they're saying, And I feel like that's really lacking in most of the sort of liberal left, whether it's this side of the Atlantic or the other. And we'll be getting to that side of the Atlantic. But before we move transatlantically, I just want to draw attention to a comment from a trans woman who said, "I'd run for Ilford North in the hopes that a trans woman could take Streeting seat in purely comic irony." And I thought that was brilliant. But that was the last comment.
Well, Natalie, if you run, I'll bung you a few quid, because if you were to beat Wes Streeting, no matter the shit show of politics, that'll be a truly bright light in a dark tunnel.
Satisfying.
Would be hilarious,
sure.
yeah. And also, Natalie, hit me up as well on the emails to let me know how you're getting on with your. I hope you don't mind me saying cafe.
Yes. Yep. Cool. That's the last comment. So I will hand it all back over to you guys.
Well, thank you so much, Cog. I really enjoyed that little segment. Maybe we'll keep doing it. Let me know in the chat if you liked this, or if it was too long. I don't know, but I think it's a bit different, so I enjoyed it myself. But we are going to move on to our final story of the evening. Canada and Mexico have responded to Donald Trump's 25% tariffs by imposing their own on the US. This is what Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said in his speech.
Tonight, I am announcing Canada will be responding to the US trade action with 25% tariffs against $155 billion worth of American goods. This will include immediate tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods as of Tuesday, followed by further tariffs on $125 billion worth of American products in 21 days' time, to allow Canadian companies and supply chains to seek to find alternatives. Our response will also be far-reaching and include everyday items such as American beer, wine, and bourbon, fruits and fruit juices, including orange juice, along with vegetables, perfume, clothing, and shoes. It'll include major consumer products like household appliances, furniture, and sports equipment, and materials like lumber and plastics, along with much, much more. And as part of our response, we are considering, with the provinces and territories, several non-tariff measures, including some relating to critical minerals, energy, procurement, and other partnerships. We will stand strong for Canada.
I mean, it kind of feels like a very passive-aggressive response. It's maybe the Canadian way. But Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum was far more blunt. We categorically reject the White House's slander against the Mexican government of having alliances with criminal organizations, as well as any intention of intervention in our territory. If such an alliance exists anywhere, it is the United States arms manufacturers that sell high-powered weapons to these criminal groups, as demonstrated by the United States Department of Justice itself in January of this year. In 4 months, our government has seized more than 40 tons of drugs, including 20 million doses of fentanyl. It has also arrested more than 10,000 people linked to these groups. If the United States government and its agencies wanted to address the serious consumption of fentanyl in their country, they could, for example, combat the sale of narcotics on the streets of their main cities, which they do not do, and the money laundering generated by this illegal activity that has done so much harm to their population. Mexico does not want confrontation. We start from collaboration between neighbouring countries. Mexico not only does not want fentanyl to reach the United States, but anywhere. Therefore, if the United States wants to combat criminal groups that traffic drugs and generate violence, we must work together in an integrated manner, but always under the principles of shared responsibility, mutual trust, collaboration, and, above all, respect for sovereignty, which is not negotiable. Coordination, yes. Subordination, no. She then goes on to say, problems are not resolved by imposing tariffs, but by talking and dialoguing, as we did in recent weeks with your State Department to address the phenomenon of migration, in our case with respect for human rights. The that President Trump has been posting on social media about the decline in migration was created by my team, which has been in constant communication with his. I instruct the Secretary of Economy to implement Plan B that I've been working on, which includes tariff and non-tariff measures in defense of Mexico's interests. Nothing by force, everything by reason and rights. Ooh, Scheinbaum clapping with hard truths. Now, the strong stance against Trump has seemed to have worked. With Mexico, the US has agreed to a month pause on tariffs. The US President Donald Trump and his Mexican counterpart Claudia Sheinbaum have announced a 1-month pause in threatened US tariffs after Sheinbaum described as a good conversation between them. Mexico has agreed to send 10,000 members of the National Guard to prevent drug trafficking from Mexico to the US, in particular of fentanyl. In return, the US has agreed to work to prevent high-powered weapons crossing the border into Mexico. The tariffs, which have been scheduled to come into force on Tuesday, will be paused for 1 month as a result. Now, who says that you have to bend the knee to the US? I mean, I think Starmer should be taking a leaf out of Mexico's book. Noffel, isn't this incredibly embarrassing for Trump? I mean, he's put himself in a lose-lose position. Tariffs are a terrible idea. It's going to harm American workers. But backtracking on the tariffs makes him look weak, and he's only been president for around two weeks. So, I mean, what do you make of it all?
I find it satisfying. I really do. If you really follow Trump's presidency, there's been loads of times he's had to make concessions and no one calls him out for it. And I think with Mexico, like you said, Starmer should take a leaf out of Claudia Sheinbaum's book, because quite frankly, it shows that there can be leaders globally, especially in such close proximity to the US, that do have a spine and will say how it is, because she's completely right. When you take a look at the narcotic problems in the US, for example, or certain opioid crises, sure, there are southern routes, but how many legal routes does the US also allow? How many times has the US government itself decided to infiltrate black neighborhoods and essentially promote a ton of drugs in order to destabilize certain organizations? And quite frankly, how many times, as we're seeing even till recently, has the US, like she said, decided to send arms to nations with armies that decide to systemically target children? I think, and I'll say it again, this shows and should be a glimmer of hope for anyone that the crises of neoliberalism that drives into fascistic rhetorics and, isolationist policies that Trump follows can be thwarted by simple common sense from the left, if that's what you want to class Claudia Sheinbaum as.
I mean, it's first of all notable that Trump hadn't spoke to Trudeau since the inauguration, which is wild. And also this latest development is that it's only with Mexico, not Canada. And I mean, I don't want to get into the aesthetics of it all, but watching Trudeau's response, I mean, I think in terms of policy, he's absolutely right to slap on tariffs. But it's still very much a weak liberal kind of response. Claudia was way more aggressive, and I think I think it's fine to say she's considerably to the left of Justin Trudeau. And I think that actually you should be standing up to the US. I know they are the superpower, and Trump is a maniac, but it just goes to show that if you don't bend over or bend the knee, shall I say, then sometimes you can actually get concessions. And that's the problem for Keir Starmer, because Keir Starmer is not a strong man. He has no backbone. Him and his government will do pretty much anything Donald Trump wants. I mean, it was recently that Donald Trump said that Keir Starmer's a good man. Imagine being called a good man by Donald Trump. So I think that actually Mexico and Claudia Sheinbaum have shown the way that you don't need to be bullied by Donald Trump. Just call him out actually on his bluff. And I think that's where a lot of his strategy comes from, for being the strong man of the world to bully other countries, is that people are so scared they kind of they fold straight away without fighting.
Yeah, I think quite literally this should echo back to leftists to have any sort of satisfaction and glimmer of hope, because quite frankly, Trump's campaign too was terrible. It was terrible. It was talking about Haitians eating cats and dogs, and Kamala handed him the win. Now, we don't want to be in the position where we are just as paralyzed as liberals, we want to make a confrontation to the US. And what is mentioned there is also the fact that Claudia Scheinbaum, she was going to increase tariffs, but she was also going to do a political method that was called a carousel tariffing. So essentially, what she would do is, if they decided to do their tariffs, she would also tariff US products, but she would change it, quite frankly, every month or so. So the US would be on their feet. And that's something we shouldn't be afraid to do. Now, we've seen Starmer come out and talk about just recently, in regards to how he doesn't need to choose between the US, or he doesn't need to choose between the EU. But what's the alternative going into a deal with Trump? Because we know Trump doesn't honor his deals, right? He should be making a stance, and it's something that we should learn from. That, there are global hegemons, but you can retaliate, and sometimes it will win you concessions, like it has with Mexico.
I mean, this is a broader question, but I do really want to get your insight on geopolitics going forward. And I think that Trump destabilizing the West in terms of the EU could become a problem. First of all, I mean, we fully acknowledge that Keir Starmer is probably going to side with the US over the EU. Even if he would prefer to side with the EU, I think he would rather align with the EU, but I don't think he's strong enough to do that. What do you think of the geopolitical fallout it could be if Trump really, really tries to create a wedge between the UK and the European Union? And what do you think in the next 50 years the geopolitical makeup could be? And we're seeing China become more and more influential. We've got BRICS. What do you see in the next 50 years?
Well, to first cover the UK and the EU, I do find it really interesting, because this is something I was thinking about today, and it's, well, if the UK decided to not kiss the ring to Trump, would Starmer maybe sort of lean to what Ed Davey's talking about with the EU. I know he's talking about Brexit's been done, Brexit's been done, but joining even just a customs union or anything like that, where would our other markets be? There would be no reason for us to try and create a surplus with China, because China manufacture everything. But what's left there is the EU, where you have countries such as India. You do even have Canada, to be honest, where that market in itself is obviously, we could have made a stance against Trump with Canada too, in terms of their markets, and defended Commonwealth and all of that, same heads of state. But yeah, it does leave me in a tricky predicament where I don't really know where our services would go to in any other market. So you raise a really important question. In terms of geopolitics, and you take a look at BRICS and you take a look at China, their Belt and Road Initiative has great influence over Africa, for example, right? And it's changing. The narrative is changing, where the US is no longer the global hegemon in the South, because when you take a look at Chinese loans and rates, and China is not doing this because they are people that want to help Africa. They're doing it to create secondary markets, right? They want to sell more. They want to create trading lines. You have to ask yourself, well, if you're an African nation, if you're in the global South, and you see the US doing terribly, are you going to decide to go with the IMF and Western loans that will cripple your economy, or are you going to go with the Chinese that will build you stuff? That probably will.
It's almost an easy option for these people.
Quite frankly, it is, and China, like any other global hegemon, wants to expand its influence. But going forward, even we take a look at the US dollar, global South banks have decided not to bank it and go for gold instead, and that's why we have seen gold rising in price too. And people are no longer looking at it as inflation hedge; they will, I might invest in it. So, geopolitically, it's really interesting, and I'll say this for the fourth time, to see neoliberalism in crises, because going forward, after Trump's acceleration of capitalism, what will follow 20 years later, because they can't keep this up for too long, and dare I say, will you see something more populist and far right than Trump? Because I don't see in any other way how you would be able to try and maintain your presence on the world stage.
And I suppose as well, look, if Keir Starmer were to take the Ed Davey approach, which is maybe the sensible option to have some kind of loose or customs union with the EU, or some kind of loose economic policy, that is going to be complete red meat for reform, and we know that reform are in bed with Trump. It's not going to be good for Keir Starmer, which is why he should have been honest up front. He should have had clearer politics, because if he does look for closer ties with the EU, it's goodbye to the Labour government. But I would say broadly, Francis Fukuyama is probably tearing his hair out. I know he has been for a long time, because he's realised his his end of history ideology has gone up in flames. So I hope he's feeling bad. I think that is all we have time for. I just want to say to our viewers, give a hand for our amazing guest, Nofal Khan, who is a debuter, should I say, on Normal Islands. Remember to like this stream, and if you're not a subscriber, then please hit that button. We are trying to reach 20,000 subscribers, and we're nearly on 18, so it's not far to go. If you want us to grow, then you can head over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/supports. There is a link to our Patreon where you can support us monthly, or follow the other link to give us a one-time contribution. We're going to be back this Thursday with Normal Island at the same time of 8 p.m. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Curtis Daly, and I'll see you next time.
Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn left.